They told me the forest was sacred. That beyond the rusted fence line, the earth wasn't ours anymore. That something old, something hungry, still walked beneath those trees. But no one ever said what it looked like. No one ever told me how it sounded, or how it watched. They just said, never cross the line. Never speak its name. And never run, unless it runs first. My name is Sergeant Elias Monroe, and for the past 5 years, I've worked the midnight shift guarding the northeast border of Black Hollow National Forest, a stretch of wilderness so vast and ancient, most maps don't even mark it. Officially, my unit's job is to prevent trespassers, illegal hunting, and to patrol the environmental boundary. Unofficially, we're the first line of defense against whatever the government won't admit lives in those woods. It was never supposed to be dangerous. Not really. Sure, there were whispers of disappearances, of strange lights in the trees, of campers going mad or not returning at all. But in 5 years, the worst I'd seen was the occasional feral animal or some kid sneaking in with a bottle of whiskey and a dare. At least, until last Thursday. That night started like all the others. Cold. Silent. The trees stood as they always had, tall and motionless, their black silhouettes etched like scars against the faint glow of the moon. I parked my Jeep just beyond Checkpoint Delta, the furthest man station on the line, and started my walk. Rifle slung over my shoulder. Flashlight in hand. Radio clipped to my belt. There was a strange stillness in the air that night, an absence of the usual night sounds. No wind. No owls. Not even the rhythmic chirp of crickets. Just silence, so thick it buzzed in my ears. I remember checking my watch. 12:47 a.m. I remember how the hairs on the back of my neck began to rise. At first, I chalked it up to nerves. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was paranoid from the stories the older guards used to tell around the station. The one about the shadow that didn't belong to anything, or the wolf with no face, or worse, the Wendigo tale, which they only told if you were new and cocky. I had laughed once. I wasn't laughing now. Then I saw it. Just past the clearing, right where the trees begin to thicken again, I spotted a figure. Pale. Tall. Wrong. It stood just beyond the edge of my flashlight's beam, unmoving. I squinted, trying to make out details, but it blended in too well with the mist that had started to roll across the forest floor. "Identify yourself," I called out. It didn't move. I stepped forward, my boots crunching softly on frostbitten leaves. The thing didn't flinch. It was standing on the other side of the fence. That was the first relief, that it hadn't crossed into our territory. But then I realized there was no fence at that particular stretch. Just old, buried posts and faded markers long overtaken by moss and time. I raised my flashlight. What I saw next made me freeze. Its body was humanoid, gaunt, with long limbs, like someone stretched a person too thin. Its skin was pale gray, almost translucent, and glistened as though wet. It had no hair, no ears, and its mouth was impossibly wide, curled into a grin that didn't match the vacant, milky eyes staring straight at me. "Back away," I ordered. Still nothing. I unshouldered my rifle, finger hovering near the trigger. That's when it blinked. Not like a person, up and down, but side to side, like some kind of lizard. And then, it smiled wider. It didn't move. It didn't have to. Because I did. I ran. I don't know why. I wasn't thinking. Every ounce of training evaporated. My legs just moved, driven by a primal instinct I hadn't felt since basic. I bolted down the trail, not even daring to look back until I was near my vehicle. I stopped only when I reached the spotlight tower beside Checkpoint Delta. The station's floodlights snapped on automatically, illuminating the path behind me. There was nothing there. No sound. No footprints. Not even broken branches. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination. Maybe a trick of the light. Maybe some pale animal diseased or injured. Maybe a prank. But none of those explanations held. Not when I returned the next night and found the fence markers moved. All of them. 3 feet further into our side of the line. The next day, I told my supervisor, Officer Danner, a grizzled vet with eyes that had seen too much and lips that rarely moved unless it was to sip bitter coffee or bark orders. I expected him to laugh, or worse, file a psych report. But instead, he leaned back in his chair, rubbed his temples, and muttered, "Another one." He pulled open a drawer and dropped a file in front of me. Inside were photos, grainy black and white surveillance images from trail cams. Most were blurry, too distorted to make out. But a few were unmistakable. That same shape. That same face. I looked at him. "What the hell is it?" He didn't answer right away. He just pulled a bottle of whiskey from the lower cabinet, poured 2 shots, and slid one toward me. "We call it the Watcher," he said. "Been showing up every decade or so. Only at night. Only near the borderline. No one's ever caught it. No one's ever crossed after seeing it and come back sane." I didn't want to believe him. But I couldn't unsee those photos. And I couldn't forget the way it blinked at me. Danner gave me a new assignment. 2 weeks of night watch at Station Echo, the farthest, deepest outpost near the swampy southern edge of the forest. Remote. Unwired. No backup for miles. "Why me?" I asked. He didn't smile. "Because you saw it. And if it saw you back, you need to finish the cycle." That night, I packed my gear and drove to Station Echo. The road was barely visible, more a trail than a path. The trees closed in above like a canopy of bones. The radio cut out half an hour before I arrived. No cell service. No lights. Just me, the cabin, and the darkness pressing in like a second skin. I made it through most of the night without incident. Until just before dawn, when I heard a whisper through the walls. Not outside. Inside. 3 words. Barely audible. Like wind through broken glass. "It remembers you." I didn't sleep that night. Not truly. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear it. The whispers. Soft, deliberate, like a voice on the edge of my consciousness. "It remembers you." The words repeated in a loop, cycling through my mind as if the forest itself was trying to speak to me. But that didn't make sense, right? The forest was just trees, brush, and shadows. Not something alive, not something that remembered. I should have turned back. I should have radioed for backup, but I didn't. Why? I didn't know. Maybe because I thought I could prove it was just stress. Just the isolation, the dark, the fatigue. Or maybe because I was terrified of what would happen if I did admit that something was wrong. But something was wrong. I could feel it. My breath had turned shallow, my body tense, as if the air around me was pressing down on my chest. The oppressive quiet that had filled the forest now felt alive, watching me, waiting for the inevitable. I spent hours sitting in the small cabin at Station Echo, running over the radio logs, checking my weapons, trying to keep myself occupied. I couldn't focus. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind outside, made me jump. It wasn't until the sun was just starting to dip that I finally ventured out. The sky was painted in shades of purple and gold, the last vestiges of daylight slipping away, and a thick fog began to roll in from a swamp. I stood on the porch, trying to steady my breathing, my hand gripping my rifle tightly. The forest stretched out before me like an abyss, a void of darkness where the trees reached for the sky like gnarled fingers. Then I heard it. A soft rustling, just beyond the edge of my vision. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it was too deliberate. Too controlled. My pulse quickened as the rustling grew louder, moving from one side of the cabin to the other, like something circling. I glanced over the edge of the porch. A figure stood at the edge of the tree line. It wasn't large, not by any means. But it was unmistakable. A man. Or at least, what looked like one. He was crouched low, his face obscured by a hood that hung down like a heavy cloak. His back was hunched, and his body seemed unnaturally long, as if he were bending too far, stretching too much. His arms hung down at odd angles, as though they didn't belong to him, like someone had stitched them to his sides instead of allowing them to move naturally. "Hey!" I shouted, voice hoarse. "Who are you?" He didn't respond. He didn't even move. I gripped the rifle tighter, my finger slipping to the trigger, but my body froze. Something about him wasn't right. He didn't look like a lost hiker or someone looking for help. His stillness, the way he hung there, almost like a shadow, made my skin crawl. And then, he moved. Not forward. Not backward. He twisted, unnaturally fast, and his head snapped toward me. His face was wrong. Too pale. No eyes. Just hollow, dark sockets that seemed to watch me, even though they weren't eyes at all. His mouth opened wide, impossibly wide, stretching beyond any human limit, revealing row upon row of jagged teeth. His grin was stretched so far that it seemed like his face would tear apart. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then, in a voice that wasn't his own, that whispered like the wind, the creature spoke. "It remembers you." Before I could react, the creature jerked its head to the side, and in the blink of an eye, it disappeared into the fog. Gone. Without a trace. My heart hammered in my chest, but my legs refused to move. I stood there, paralyzed. I didn't dare look away, not even for a second, terrified that if I did, it would come back. But after what felt like an eternity, I snapped out of it. My body surged into motion. I rushed back inside, locked the door, and bolted every window. I stood by the cabin's dim light, staring out into the fog. The whispering had stopped, but it didn't feel like the danger had passed. It felt like it had only just begun. I grabbed the radio. "Echo to base, this is Sergeant Monroe. Do you copy?" Silence. Again I called, but there was only static. "Damn it," I muttered under my breath. My only option now was to wait, to hope the thing hadn't crossed the border. But I knew it had. And I wasn't alone anymore. I barely slept that night. Every hour felt like a year, every creak of the cabin's wooden frame like the footfalls of something approaching. Something waiting. I couldn't help but feel the eyes of the forest on me. I heard the whispers again, closer this time, more urgent. When I looked out through the small gaps in the window blinds, all I saw was fog, thick enough to swallow whole trees. But I felt it, the presence lurking out there, just beyond the mist, watching me, waiting for me to make the wrong move. The next morning, when the first light of dawn cracked through the fog, I was already packing. I needed to report this. I needed to get back to base. I grabbed my things and headed for my jeep, moving with a sense of urgency that I couldn't quite explain. I wasn't sure what I was running from, whether it was the creature I'd seen or the fear that it would follow me. But as I started my vehicle and drove down the narrow trail, I glanced back one last time. The figure was standing at the edge of the tree line again. It was no longer hiding. It was waiting. And the moment our eyes met, I knew. It had been following me all along. By the time I reached the base, I was frantic. I didn't care who I spoke to, who I had to report it to, I just needed answers. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The station was too quiet. No chatter on the radios. No sign of anyone. Just empty chairs and locked offices. I hurried to the command room. The door was open, but the lights were off. Inside, the room was cold. The screens, usually filled with live camera feeds and map overlays, were dark. Only one screen flickered, a static image of the border where I'd just been. But what caught my eye wasn't the static. It was the shape, something moving in the fog. Not on the screen. Behind me. The door slammed shut. And then I heard the whispers again. Louder this time. "It remembers you." The door slammed shut behind me with such force that I nearly fell to the floor. The room plunged into darkness, and I froze, holding my breath, listening to the whispers, asterisk low, insistent, haunting. Asterisk I couldn't tell if they were in my mind or if the creature was speaking from behind the walls, but it didn't matter. The weight of their presence was crushing. I reached for my flashlight, my hands trembling as I clicked it on. The weak beam sliced through the black, illuminating the corners of the room in a weak, eerie glow. But there was nothing there, nothing except the abandoned chairs, the dusty computer terminals, and the maps of the forest, each marked with red circles around areas that seemed far too close to the border. The whispers grew louder. I tried to steady my breathing, but it felt impossible. There was something else in the air, something thick and suffocating. The room was colder than it should have been, the kind of cold that crawls under your skin, making your muscles ache. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice barely above a whisper, but I knew no one would answer. The base was deserted, everyone was gone, except for me. I moved to the command desk, looking for any signs of life, any explanation for what had happened. The radio was silent, the intercom dead. It was as if the station had been abandoned in an instant. My pulse throbbed in my ears as I scanned the monitors. One of them flickered, weak and distorted at first, but then it cleared. I stared at the image. It was the border. The place where I'd seen the creature. The same stretch of trees. But now, it was different. The fog was thicker, the shadows deeper, and there, moving through the mist, a group of people. They were all standing still, staring into the camera with wide, vacant eyes. And in the center of the screen, standing just beyond the trees, was the figure, the same pale face, the same twisted grin. Only now, it was looking right at me. Its empty sockets were wide, unblinking. "It remembers you," it whispered again, its voice coming from the monitor itself. I staggered back, my heart racing as the screen went black. I turned toward the door, but the whispers had grown louder, and my body stiffened. It was as though the walls were closing in, and I wasn't alone anymore. It was in the room with me now. I reached for my rifle, but my fingers were slick with sweat. The door in front of me slowly creaked open, and in the doorway stood something that shouldn't have been there. It was a man. No, someone I knew. Captain Daniels. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, his clothes ripped and stained with dirt and what looked like blood. His movements were stiff, jerky, like a puppet on invisible strings. His eyes met mine, but there was no recognition in them, only cold emptiness. "Captain," I asked, my voice shaking. "What happened? Where is everyone?" He didn't respond. Instead, his lips parted, revealing teeth that were unnaturally sharp. His mouth stretched impossibly wide as he let out a low, guttural growl. And then, he lunged at me. I fired, the sound of the rifle echoing in the empty room. The shot hit him in the chest, but he didn't fall. He staggered backward, his body twitching as though he was trying to shake off the impact. His face warped into something inhuman, and he lunged again, this time faster, more violently. But before he could reach me, the room went dark once more. The power failed, the lights shutting off with a sudden snap. The sound of footsteps echoed from the far side of the room, but they weren't coming from Captain Daniels anymore. They were heavier, slower, more deliberate, like something that had been waiting. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. My breath was shallow, panic rising in my throat as I turned toward the door. But as I did, I saw a shadow move in the corner of my eye. It wasn't Daniels. It was something else. Something far worse. It was the creature. It stepped forward from the blackness of the room, its pale face illuminated by the dim light filtering in through the windows. Its body stretched unnaturally long, its limbs too thin, and its grin, wide, grotesque, and teeth too sharp to be real, seemed to stretch even further than before. I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut with a deafening crash. Trapped. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening now, echoing in every corner of the room. They weren't just coming from the creature anymore. They were coming from everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. They were inside my head. "It remembers you." It was the same voice, but it was everywhere. I spun around, trying to make sense of it all, my mind fraying at the edges. But the creature didn't let up. It stepped forward, its twisted grin widening with each step, its breath a low rasp that filled the room. I could see it now, the way it moved, in jerks like something unnatural. Like something that didn't belong in this world. It reached out to me with long bony fingers, and I stumbled backward, heart racing, legs buckling beneath me. The rifle in my hand felt useless, its weight a mockery of the fear that had gripped me. "You remember," the creature said, its voice distorted. It wasn't speaking, it was whispering the words straight into my mind. It reached out, closer now. My breath hitched, my vision blurred, and I fought to stay conscious, to make sense of the madness unfolding around me. And then, just as it was about to touch me, someone, crashed into the room. It was Danner. He came out of nowhere, his rifle raised, his face grim and determined. He fired 2 shots directly into the creature's chest, and the thing shrieked. A sound so awful, so piercing that it felt like my bones were vibrating in protest. The creature recoiled, but it didn't fall. It just paused, as though assessing the damage. Danner didn't wait for it to move. He grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the door, shoving me out of the room with a force I didn't expect. We ran, stumbling down the hallway, through the empty base, until we reached the exit. But before we could escape, I turned back. And I saw it again. The thing, standing just behind us in the hallway, its hollow eyes staring straight through me. "You can't escape," it whispered. "Not this time." The door to Station Echo slammed behind us, sealing the creature inside, or so I hoped. Danner didn't stop running, didn't even glance back. His boots hit the concrete hard, sending echoes through the empty hallways as we dashed toward the jeep. I followed, my legs aching, my mind reeling. I was almost too afraid to breathe, but I could feel it. It was still out there, still watching, still waiting. We reached the vehicle, and Danner shoved me into the passenger seat, his face grim as he slammed the door behind him. His eyes flickered toward the rearview mirror, watching the base for any sign of the creature. But there was nothing, just the abandoned station, quiet and still under the weight of an unnatural fog that had rolled in without warning. "Drive," Danner ordered, his voice tense but calm. I didn't hesitate. I slammed the jeep into gear and floored it, tearing down the dirt road that led away from Station Echo. The fog pressed against the windshield like a heavy hand, swirling in every direction, cutting visibility down to almost nothing. "What the hell happened?" I gasped, glancing at Danner as I swerved to avoid a pothole. "What is it? What was that thing?" Danner stayed silent, his jaw clenched, his fingers tightly gripping the edge of the seat. The only sound was the engine roaring as we sped through the trees, but the stillness between us was unbearable. Finally, after what felt like hours, Danner spoke. "It's not just a creature," he muttered, his voice low. "It's the curse of Black Hollow. You've seen it, felt it, haven't you?" I didn't need him to finish. I already knew. I had felt it, the presence, the whispers, the way it clung to me like a dark shadow, a constant reminder that I wasn't just guarding the border of the forest. I was part of it. Or it was part of me. "I don't understand," I said, my voice shaky. "How long has this been going on? What is it hunting for?" Danner took a deep breath, leaning back in his seat. His eyes flickered toward the rearview mirror again, but there was no sign of the creature. "I didn't think we were safe. Not yet." "It's been here for centuries," he said, his voice hollow. "The thing you saw isn't just some animal or lost spirit. It's a guardian. But not like any guardian you've ever heard of." I shot him a confused look. "Guardian? Are you saying we're protecting it?" "No," Danner shook his head, but his gaze was distant, as if the weight of this knowledge was crushing him. "We're feeding it. We've been feeding it for as long as anyone can remember." The road twisted ahead, the fog thickening as if it were alive, creeping toward us from every direction. But I focused on Danner's words. "Feeding it." The words didn't make sense, not until I saw the graveyard of old, rusted fences lining the farthest boundary of the forest, gates that led to nothing but blackness. "The government came in years ago," Danner continued, "back when Black Hollow was just a name on a map. They established a research station, thinking they could study the forest and what lived there. But they found out something else, something far worse than any creature they could ever imagine." My heart beat faster as I struggled to understand. What did they find? A doorway. A crack in the earth, deep in the forest. The kind of place where reality doesn't hold. Something ancient, something hungry, came through that crack. And it remembers the people who crossed. The people who created the doorway. His eyes flickered toward me. "You don't know this, but your family, your great-grandfather, was one of the original men who helped open that door." The words hit me like a slap. "No," I gasped. "That's impossible. My family never." "I've been tracking it," Danner said, his voice becoming more urgent. "You don't know the whole truth. You were chosen by the forest, just like the others. The creature that watches, knows the bloodline. It knows who's connected to the curse." My mind raced as I processed what he said. What happens if we stop feeding it? What happens if we just leave? Danner's face grew darker, his eyes haunted. "The forest won't let you. It's more than just a place, more than just trees. It's a prison. A tomb. And you're its prisoner. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as I forced the jeep to a stop in the middle of the road. The fog closed in around us, thick and suffocating. You mean to say we're stuck? That this thing is following us, hunting us because of my blood? Danner's eyes hardened. That's exactly what I'm saying. You felt it, didn't you? The way it remembers you. The way it's calling to you. I clenched the wheel, my knuckles white. The realization hit me with the force of a blow. I was tied to the forest, to the curse, in ways I couldn't escape. But there was something more, something worse, coming for me. We have one shot, Danner said, his voice steady, despite the chaos around us. There's a ritual. A way to sever the connection. But it's dangerous. And if we fail, if we don't finish it, it'll be over for us. For everyone. I could feel the blood drain from my face. What do we have to do? Danner's eyes grew darker. We have to go back. We have to return to where it all started, the crack in the forest. And we have to close it. But to do that, we need to find the original boundary marker. The one that was buried when the forest took control. I stared at him, realizing the magnitude of what he was saying. You're telling me we have to go back into the forest and face it? He nodded grimly. Yes. The ritual will only work if the bloodline is reclaimed. You have to return to the place where it all began. Where your great-grandfather opened the door. I stared out at the thick fog swirling around us, the trees standing tall and ominous like silent sentinels. It wasn't a forest anymore. It was a grave. A tomb. A trap. And I was its bait. The fog was thicker than ever as we drove back toward Black Hollow. Danner's hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, but his face was unreadable, as if he'd long accepted what had to be done. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I had known about my life, about the world, was a lie. That the blood coursing through my veins was as cursed as the land I'd been assigned to protect. The forest loomed ahead, dark and silent, its trees swaying like ancient ghosts in the thick mist. It felt as though the forest had grown even more alive, its presence pressing in from all sides, suffocating, waiting for the inevitable. Danner glanced at me, his voice steady but grim. Once we cross into the border, there's no turning back. The forest doesn't let go of its own. It doesn't matter what we do. Asterisk at asterisk will always know where we are. Always. I nodded, though my mouth had gone dry. The reality of what we were about to do settled heavily in my chest. There was no escaping the forest, not anymore. Even if we succeeded in closing the doorway, the creature would always be there, lurking in the shadows, remembering us. We reached the boundary line, where the old fence posts had long rotted away, and the only markers were worn stones, half buried in moss. Danner didn't hesitate, driving the jeep straight through the gap in the trees, where the shadows seemed to stretch further than any light could penetrate. The road was treacherous, more of a trail than anything else, winding and narrow, twisting through dense underbrush. The deeper we went, the more unnatural the forest became. The trees seemed to crowd in closer, their bark warped and twisted, like they were alive, watching. I could almost feel their eyes on me, their gaze burning through my skin, searching for the weakness that would finally make me break. We reached the clearing, what was left of it. The place where it all began. The crack in the earth. It was worse than I'd imagined. The ground had split open, jagged and uneven, like a scar on the face of the world. The earth around it was barren, lifeless. No plants, no insects, nothing. Just a deep, gaping chasm that seemed to swallow light itself. "This is it," Danner said quietly, parking the jeep a few yards away. "The ritual starts here. We need to find the marker, your great-grandfather's marker. It's buried somewhere nearby." I stepped out of the jeep, my feet sinking into the wet earth. The air was thick with the smell of rot, and a sense of dread crept over me like a cold wind. The fog was so thick now I could barely see my hand in front of my face, and the whispers, they were back, louder than ever, like a chorus of voices threading through the trees. Asterisk, it remembers you. It remembers everything. Asterisk. I flinched, my heart pounding in my chest as the words echoed through my mind. The creature, asterisk it asterisk, was close. I could feel it. Danner grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "Focus." We don't have much time. We need to close the doorway before it's too late. We began to search the clearing, moving carefully through the fog, our footsteps muffled by the soft, wet earth beneath us. Every rustle of the trees, every creak of a distant branch, made my skin crawl. I knew it was there, lurking, watching. The creature wasn't far. Minutes stretched into hours as we searched for the marker. It wasn't until I felt something shift in the earth beneath my feet that I realized I was standing on top of it. I dropped to my knees, digging through the soft soil with my bare hands. The dirt was loose, as though it had been disturbed recently. I scraped away more and more until my fingers brushed against something cold, metal. I pulled it free, my heart pounding as I wiped the dirt away. It was a plaque, an old weathered brass marker, etched with strange symbols that made no sense to me. But what caught my attention was the name inscribed on it. Elias Monroe. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat. My great-grandfather. He had been the one who had helped open the door all those years ago. He had been part of the team that had summoned the thing that now hunted me. And I was the one who had inherited the curse. Danner's voice pulled me from my thoughts. Place it in the center of the crack. The ritual must be completed. I nodded, swallowing hard. There was no turning back now. I stood and carefully placed the marker into the center of the split earth, just as Danner had instructed. The moment it touched the ground, the earth trembled, a low hum vibrating through the air, sending shockwaves through my body. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as though the forest itself was alive and screaming in protest. I took a deep breath, reaching for the rifle slung across my back. What now? Now we close it, Danner said. The ritual will only work if we both do it. He stood beside me, his eyes scanning the darkness, the forest around us growing colder. We need to speak the words, he continued, his voice tense. We need to sever the bond once and for all. I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. What are the words? Danner stepped forward, his face pale but resolute. He placed his hands over the marker, and I did the same. Asterisk by blood, by bone, by spirit bound, we sever the thread, we break the ground. Asterisk. As the words left my mouth, the forest seemed to respond. The trees groaned, the earth rumbled, and a sound like cracking thunder filled the air. I could hear it now, the creature, moving toward us. The ground beneath our feet shook, and I could feel the presence behind me, just beyond the fog, just out of sight. But I didn't look. Asterisk let the door close, let the bonds break, let the hunger cease, let the forest wake. Asterisk. The words spilled out of me like a chant, something primal rising from deep within. As we spoke, the marker began to glow, faint at first, then brighter and brighter, until the entire clearing was bathed in a blinding light. The air around us crackled, and the ground split even further, as though the forest itself was fighting to keep the doorway open. Then there was a shriek. A terrible, soul-piercing shriek. It came from the depths of the crack. The creature, the guardian, the thing that had haunted this land for centuries, was screaming in agony, its voice a deafening roar. The fog began to swirl violently, whipping around us like a hurricane. Danner and I held our ground, our hands still pressed against the marker as the light intensified. And then, with a final ear-splitting crack, the forest went still. Deadly quiet. The fog began to dissipate. The trees no longer groaned. The whispers stopped. We had done it. The doorway had closed. But as I stood there, breathing heavily, heart pounding, I knew the forest was still watching. The creature was gone, for now. But the curse was still there, buried deep beneath the earth, waiting. Because no one who truly belongs to Black Hollow can ever truly leave. The end.